The blistering summer sun bore down on Abigail Keller as she stumbled along the dusty road leading to Redemption Springs. Her swollen belly, now 7 months heavy with child, made each step more difficult than the last. Dust clung to her tear-streaked face as she placed a protective hand over her unborn baby, willing her tired legs forward despite the exhaustion threatening to bring her to her knees. It was 1878, and the promise of a new life in Montana Territory had withered away like the parched grass beneath her worn boots. Her husband Thomas had died of typhoid 3 weeks prior, leaving her alone and desperate in a land that showed little mercy to those without means. With nowhere else to turn, Abigail had set out for the nearest town with nothing but a small bundle of possessions and the child growing inside her. As the modest buildings of Redemption Springs came into view, Abigail felt a mixture of relief and dread. Relief that her journey might soon end, and dread at what awaited her a stranger, pregnant and penniless, in a town where she knew no one. The main street was alive with afternoon activity. Men on horseback trotted past wooden storefronts while townspeople moved about their business. Abigail's entrance drew curious glances, but no one approached the bedraggled woman as she made her way toward what appeared to be the town's general store. A wooden sign swinging in the gentle breeze read, "Ingram's Goods and Sundries." Gathering what little courage remained, Abigail pushed open the door, the small bell above announcing her arrival. The store's interior offered blessed shade from the relentless sun. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from canned goods to tools, fabric to ammunition. Behind the counter stood a man in his mid-30s, his broad shoulders filling out a simple cotton shirt. He looked up from his ledger, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, with kind eyes that contrasted with his rugged appearance. "Afternoon, madam," he said, his deep voice carrying across the empty store. "What can I help you with today?" Abigail hesitated, clutching her small bundle tighter. I need some supplies. Food mainly. Perhaps some thread." The man nodded and stepped around the counter. "Name's Wade Ingram. Store's been in my family since my pa built it 15 years back." He gestured to the shelves. "What kind of food were you looking for?" "Just the basics," Abigail replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Flour, beans, salt pork if you have it." Wade nodded and began gathering the items. "New to Redemption Springs?" he asked, though the answer was obvious. "Yes," Abigail replied. "Just arrived. My name is Abigail Keller." "Traveling alone?" Wade asked, his tone conversational but his eyes taking in her condition with concern. Abigail's hand moved instinctively to her belly. "My husband passed 3 weeks ago. Typhoid. We were heading to his brother's homestead near Helena." Wade's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Keller." As he placed the items on the counter, Abigail's heart sank. Even these few necessities would cost more than she had. The meager coins in her pocket wouldn't cover half of what she needed. She began, her cheeks burning with shame. "I find myself in a difficult position, Mr. Ingram. I don't have enough money for these supplies." Wade watched her carefully, saying nothing. "But I can work," Abigail continued hurriedly. "I can clean your store, organize inventory, mend clothes, anything you need. I'm strong despite my condition, and I learn quickly." The words tumbled out in desperation. "I could work for the food now and continue working to pay for lodging until I can travel again." Wade's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in thought. He studied the woman before him, exhausted, pregnant, and alone, yet still standing tall despite it all. "Mrs. Keller," he said finally, "please have a seat." He gestured to a chair near the counter. Abigail sank gratefully into the chair, her legs finally giving way. "When's the last time you ate a proper meal?" Wade asked. "Yesterday morning," she admitted. "I've been rationing what little I had." Wade nodded and disappeared into the back room. He returned moments later with a plate of bread, cheese, and dried beef. "Eat," he said simply, placing the food before her. Abigail looked up in surprise. "But I haven't paid?" "Consider it hospitality," Wade interrupted. "We can discuss payment after you've eaten." Hunger overcame pride, and Abigail ate slowly at first, then with increasing urgency as her body demanded nourishment. Wade busied himself with other tasks, giving her privacy in her moment of need. When she finished, Wade returned to the counter. "Mrs. Keller, I won't be taking payment from you today. Not in money and not in labor." Abigail's eyes widened. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Ingram. I can work." "It's not charity," he cut in firmly. "It's decency. You're in no condition to be scrubbing floors or lifting crates." "Then how am I to pay?" she asked, confusion evident in her voice. Wade began packing the supplies she'd requested into a burlap sack, adding additional items she hadn't asked for: tea, sugar, a small jar of honey, and a tin of hard candies. "There's a small cabin behind my store," he explained as he worked. "It belonged to my father. It's been sitting empty since he passed last winter. It's yours for as long as you need it." Abigail stared at him in disbelief. "Mr. Ingram, I couldn't possibly—" "You can and you will," Wade said, his tone gentle but brooking no argument. "That child you're carrying deserves to come into this world with a roof overhead and food on the table." "And what do you expect in return?" Abigail asked cautiously. Years of hard lessons making her wary of unexpected kindness. Wade's expression darkened momentarily. "Mrs. Keller, I'm offering help because it's the right thing to do. Nothing more." Shame colored Abigail's cheeks. "Forgive me. Experience has taught me that few things in this world come without cost." Wade's expression softened. "No forgiveness needed. This world can be harsh, especially to those on their own." He finished packing the supplies and handed the sack to her. "The cabin's clean and has the basics: bed, stove, table, and chairs. There's a pump out back for water." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks necessary," Wade said. "Once you've rested, if you truly want to work, we can discuss it. But not today, and not until you're ready." Abigail nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Come on," Wade said, moving toward the door. "I'll show you to the cabin and help carry these supplies." As they stepped outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street. Wade led Abigail around the side of the store to a narrow path that wound behind the building. The cabin came into view, small but sturdy, with a covered porch and a chimney of stacked stone. "It's not much," Wade said, suddenly self-conscious. "But it's weathertight and private." "It's perfect," Abigail whispered, gazing at what would be her first real home since leaving Pennsylvania months ago. Wade unlocked the door and stepped aside to let her enter first. The interior was simple but clean, a main room with a small kitchen area, a pot-bellied stove for cooking and heat, a table with 4 chairs, and a separate bedroom visible through an open doorway. "The bed's made up with fresh linens," Wade explained. "There's firewood stacked on the porch, and the pantry has some basic supplies. I'll bring over a few more things in the morning." Abigail turned to face him, her eyes brimming with tears. "Mr. Ingram, I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found your store today." "Call me Wade," he said, placing the sack of supplies on the table. "And don't worry about what might have been. You're here now, and you're safe." As he turned to leave, Abigail called after him. "Wade, thank you. Not just for the supplies or the cabin, but for treating me with dignity when I had nothing to offer but labor." Wade paused at the door, his expression unreadable. "Rest well, Mrs. Keller. I'll check on you tomorrow." As the door closed behind him, Abigail sank into one of the wooden chairs, overwhelmed by the day's events. For the first time since Thomas had drawn his final breath, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the future might not be as bleak as she had feared. The following morning, Abigail awoke to sunlight streaming through the small window beside the bed. For a moment, disorientation gripped her as she stared at the unfamiliar ceiling. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back the long journey to Redemption Springs, meeting Wade Ingram, his unexpected kindness. She rose slowly, her body aching from the miles, traveled but refreshed from a night's sleep in a real bed. The cabin was quiet save for the chirping of birds outside. Abigail washed her face in the basin, combed her long auburn hair, and changed into her cleanest dress, which wasn't saying much after weeks on the road. A soft knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Wade standing on the porch, holding a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Good morning," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. "Thought you might appreciate some breakfast." "That's very kind," Abigail replied, stepping back to let him enter. "But you've already done so much." "It's nothing fancy," Wade said, setting the basket on the table. "Just some fresh bread, eggs, and bacon from the hotel restaurant. Mrs. Holloway's the best cook in the territory." The aroma of freshly baked bread filled the small cabin as Wade uncovered the basket. Abigail's stomach growled audibly, and she placed a hand over it in embarrassment. Wade pretended not to notice. "How did you sleep?" he asked, removing plates and utensils from the basket as well. "Better than I have in months," Abigail admitted, moving to help him. Their hands brushed briefly as they both reached for the same plate, and she pulled back quickly, a flush rising to her cheeks. They sat across from each other at the small table, an awkward silence falling between them as Abigail served the food. "Mr. Ingram Wade," she began, breaking the silence, "I meant what I said yesterday. I want to work to pay for all this. I can't accept such generosity without giving something in return." Wade took a bite of eggs before responding. "If you're determined to work, I won't stop you. But it will be on terms that make sense for your condition." His eyes flickered briefly to her rounded belly. "And it won't be scrubbing floors or lifting heavy items." "What did you have in mind?" Abigail asked, relieved that he wasn't outright refusing her offer. "I could use help with the bookkeeping," Wade said. "My handwriting's terrible, and numbers have never been my strong suit. My father used to handle it, but since he passed..." He shrugged. "It's fallen behind." "I was a schoolteacher before I married," Abigail said, her eyes brightening. "Numbers and writing are something I can certainly help with." Wade nodded, looking pleased. "Good. You can start whenever you feel ready. No rush." As they finished breakfast, Wade seemed hesitant to leave. "Mrs. Keller." "Abigail, please," she interrupted. "If I'm to call you Wade." He nodded. "Abigail, I was wondering if you might join me for supper at the hotel tonight. The food's good, and it would give you a chance to meet some of the townspeople." Abigail hesitated. The idea of facing a room full of strangers was daunting, but she knew she couldn't hide away in the cabin forever. "That would be lovely," she said finally. "Thank you." Wade looked relieved. "I'll come by around 6 then." After he left, Abigail set about organizing her few possessions and exploring the cabin more thoroughly. The pantry was indeed stocked with basic supplies, and she found a small collection of books on a shelf in the bedroom, mostly practical volumes on farming and animal husbandry, but also a few novels that looked well read. In a trunk at the foot of the bed, she discovered linens, a beautiful handmade quilt, and, to her surprise, a small bundle of baby clothes. They were yellowed with age, but of fine quality. Abigail ran her fingers over the tiny garments, wondering about their history. Later that afternoon, as promised, Abigail made her way to the store to begin helping with the bookkeeping. The shop was busier than the previous day, with several customers browsing the merchandise. Wade looked up from helping an elderly woman select fabric and smiled when he saw Abigail. Mrs. Keller, he called across the store. Please, make yourself comfortable at the desk in the back room. The ledgers are there waiting for you. The back room was neat and well organized, with a large desk positioned beneath a window that allowed ample light. The ledgers, as Wade had suggested, were in disarray entries haphazardly recorded, with many blank spaces where information should have been. Abigail lost herself in the work, finding comfort in the familiar task of organizing numbers and entries. She had just finished reconstructing the previous month's accounts when Wade entered the room. Making progress? He asked, peering over her shoulder at the neatly written pages. Yes, Abigail replied. It's not as bad as you made it sound. You've just been a bit creative with your bookkeeping methods. Wade laughed, a warm sound that filled the small room. That's a kind way of saying I've made a mess of it. Nothing that can't be fixed, Abigail assured him with a smile. Wade checked his pocket watch. It's nearly 6. Shall we head to the hotel for supper? Abigail suddenly felt self-conscious about her appearance. I should go back to the cabin first and freshen up. You look fine, Wade said, then quickly added. But of course, if you'd prefer to change, I can wait. 20 minutes later, having changed into her best dress, a simple blue cotton that had once been quite fashionable, but now showed signs of wear, and pinned her hair into a modest style, Abigail rejoined Wade for the walk to the hotel. Redemption Springs Hotel was the tallest building in town, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and large windows. As they climbed the steps, Abigail felt the curious gazes of those already seated on the porch, enjoying the cooler evening air. Wade placed a reassuring hand at the small of her back as they entered the dining room. Don't worry, he murmured. They're good people, just naturally curious about newcomers. The dining room was nearly full, and a hush fell over the crowd as they entered. Wade led Abigail to a table near the window, pulling out her chair with an old-world courtesy that surprised her. A plump, middle-aged woman with rosy cheeks approached their table immediately. Wade Ingram, you've been holding out on us, she said, her voice warm with affection and curiosity. Aren't you going to introduce your lovely companion? Mrs. Holloway, this is Mrs. Abigail Keller, Wade said. She's new to town and will be staying in my father's cabin for a while. Abigail, this is Mrs. Holloway, the finest cook in Montana Territory and the source of most of Redemption Springs' news and gossip. Mrs. Holloway swatted Wade's arm good-naturedly. Don't you listen to him, Mrs. Keller. I just take an interest in my community. She looked at Abigail's pregnant belly with undisguised curiosity. Will your husband be joining you in Redemption Springs soon? Dear? Abigail's smile faltered. My husband passed away recently. Typhoid. Mrs. Holloway's expression immediately softened. Oh, you poor dear. I'm so sorry for your loss. She patted Abigail's hand. Well, you found yourself in good company with Wade here. His bark is worse than his bite. As Mrs. Holloway moved away to fetch their supper, Wade looked apologetically at Abigail. I should have warned you. Mrs. Holloway means well, but subtlety isn't her strong suit. It's all right, Abigail assured him. I'll have to get used to explaining my situation. Throughout the meal, various townspeople stopped by their table to introduce themselves. Sheriff Dawson, a tall man with a silver mustache, Dr. Parker and his wife, Mr. Reynolds, the banker, and countless others whose names blurred together in Abigail's mind. Most were welcoming, though Abigail noticed a few disapproving glances from some of the women when they saw her condition and learned she was a widow. Wade seemed oblivious to these looks, or perhaps he simply chose to ignore them. As they were finishing their apple pie, a commotion at the entrance drew everyone's attention. A man stumbled in, clearly intoxicated, his clothes dusty from the road. Where is she? He demanded loudly. Where's the Keller woman? Abigail froze, her fork clattering against her plate. The man's voice was unfamiliar, but he knew her name. Wade was on his feet immediately, moving to intercept the stranger. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice and state your business." The man swayed on his feet, pointing an unsteady finger at Wade. "My business is with her," he slurred, gesturing vaguely toward Abigail, Thomas Keller's widow. Sheriff Dawson appeared beside the drunk man. "That's enough, Fletcher. You're disturbing these good people's supper." "She needs to know," Fletcher insisted. "Thomas wasn't heading to No Brothers' homestead. He was running from gambling debts. Owed me $50, he did. Said his wife would work it off if anything happened to him." A collective gasp went through the dining room. Abigail felt the blood drain from her face. "That's a lie," she whispered, though no one but Wade could hear her. Wade's expression had hardened. "Mrs. Keller is under my protection," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent room. "Any debts her husband may or may not have had died with him." Fletcher sneered. "Protection, is it? That what they're calling it these days?" Before Wade could respond, Sheriff Dawson grabbed Fletcher's arm. "That's enough. You're spending the night in my jail to sober up. We can sort this out in the morning." As the sheriff dragged the protesting man away, the dining room erupted in whispers. Abigail sat frozen, humiliation washing over her in waves. Wade returned to the table, his face grim. "Let's go," he said quietly. "I'll take you back to the cabin." The walk back was silent, Abigail too mortified to speak. Only when they reached the cabin did she find her voice again. "I swear to you, I knew nothing about gambling debts," she said, her hands trembling as she unlocked the door. "Thomas never mentioned any Fletcher to me." "I believe you," Wade said simply. "Everyone in that dining room now thinks I'm either a liar or a woman of loose morals," Abigail continued, her voice breaking. "That I came here to work off my husband's debts in any way necessary." Wade's expression darkened. "Anyone who knows me knows that's not true, and those who don't know me will learn quickly enough." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I think Fletcher was lying, or at least exaggerating. He's known for trying to swindle money from vulnerable people." Abigail sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "Thank you for defending me." "It was nothing," Wade said, though they both knew it wasn't true. He had publicly aligned himself with her, a pregnant widow with a questionable past. In a small town like Redemption Springs, such a gesture wouldn't go unnoticed. "Will you be all right?" Wade asked, lingering at the door. Abigail nodded. "Yes. I just need to rest." "Lock the door behind me," Wade instructed. "I doubt Fletcher will cause more trouble tonight, but better safe than sorry." After Wade left, Abigail did as he suggested, securing the door before moving to the bedroom. As she undressed for bed, her hand brushed against the small bundle of letters she kept in her dress pocket, the last communications from Thomas before his death. On impulse, she removed them and began reading through them again. Thomas had been sparse with details about their future, focusing instead on his love for her and his excitement about the baby. Nothing in the letters suggested gambling debts or a man named Fletcher. And yet, doubt crept in. Had she truly known her husband? They had married quickly after a brief courtship, drawn together by mutual attraction and shared dreams of a better life in the West. But now, alone in a strange town with his child growing inside her, Abigail wondered how much of what Thomas had told her was true. Sleep eluded her for hours as she pondered her situation. By morning, she had made a decision. She would stay in Redemption Springs, at least until the baby was born. She would work for Wade to pay for her keep, prove herself to the townspeople, and build a life for herself and her child, regardless of what rumors Fletcher might spread. The next morning, Abigail woke early, determined to face whatever challenges the day might bring. She dressed carefully in her most practical dress and pinned her hair severely back, wanting to present an image of respectability and industry. As she was preparing a simple breakfast, a knock came at the door. Warily she approached, calling out, "Who is it?" "Wade," came the reply. "And Sheriff Dawson." Abigail opened the door to find the two men standing on the porch. Wade looked as though he hadn't slept well, while the sheriff's expression was professionally neutral. "Good morning, Mrs. Keller," Sheriff Dawson said, removing his hat. "May we come in? We need to discuss last night's incident." "Of course," Abigail said, stepping aside to let them enter. "I was just making coffee. Would either of you care for some?" Both men accepted, and soon they were seated at the table, steaming cups before them. Sheriff Dawson pulled out a small notebook. "Mrs. Keller, I spoke with Fletcher this morning after he sobered up," the sheriff began. "He maintains that your husband owed him $50 from poker games in Denver." "I knew nothing of any gambling debts," Abigail said firmly. "Thomas never mentioned them to me, nor did he mention a man named Fletcher." The sheriff nodded, making a note. "Fletcher also claims that Thomas told him if anything happened to him, you would work off the debt. He was quite specific about what kind of work he meant." Abigail's cheeks burned with indignation. "That is absolutely false. My husband would never have suggested such a thing." "I believe you, Mrs. Keller," Sheriff Dawson said, his tone softening slightly. "Fletcher has a reputation for trying to collect on dubious debts. That said, it's possible your husband did lose some money to him gambling. Men sometimes keep such things from their wives." Abigail's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "Even if that were true, I fail to see how I could be held responsible for debts I knew nothing about and never agreed to pay." "You can't be," Wade interjected firmly. "Sheriff, there's no legal basis for Fletcher's claims. He can't collect from Mrs. Keller even if Thomas did owe him money." Sheriff Dawson nodded. "That's correct. However, I wanted to warn you both that Fletcher isn't the type to give up easily. He's been ordered to leave town by noon today, but there's nothing stopping him from coming back later." After the sheriff left, Wade remained at the table, turning his coffee cup slowly in his hands. "I'm sorry for all this," he said finally. "Your first day in town shouldn't have been marred by such ugliness." "It's hardly your fault," Abigail replied. "You've been nothing but kind to me." Wade looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Some people in town might not see it that way. There will be talk about you staying in my cabin, about my defending you last night." "Are you concerned about your reputation?" Abigail asked, a note of hurt in her voice. "No," Wade said quickly. "Not for myself. But I don't want your reputation tarnished by association with me." Abigail was confused. "I don't understand. You're a respected business owner." Wade sighed. "It's complicated. My mother was half Cheyenne. My father faced considerable prejudice for marrying her. And even after all these years, there are those in town who've never fully accepted me." Abigail studied Wade's face, noting for the first time the subtle features that hinted at his heritage, the high cheekbones, the slight tilt to his dark eyes. "I had no idea," she said softly. "Most newcomers don't notice right away," Wade said with a shrug. "Those who've known me all my life have never let me forget it, though most are civil enough. But having a pregnant widow stay in my property, under my protection, it will give the gossips plenty to talk about." "Perhaps I should find somewhere else to stay," Abigail suggested reluctantly. "No," Wade said firmly, "unless that's what you want. I'm just warning you that things might be difficult for a while." "Difficult has been my constant companion these past months," Abigail said with a small smile. "I can weather a little town gossip if you can." Wade's expression lightened. "Then it's settled. You'll stay in the cabin and help with my bookkeeping. In time, the talk will die down." As the days passed, Abigail settled into a routine in Redemption Springs. Each morning, she would help Wade with the bookkeeping and organization of the store. In the afternoons, She would work on preparing the cabin for the baby's arrival, sewing small garments from fabric Wade had given her from his store. True to Wade's prediction, gossip about their arrangement circulated through town. Some customers would fall silent when Abigail entered the store. Others would whisper behind their hands. A few of the more religious women in town made a point of crossing to the other side of the street when they saw her coming, yet not everyone was judgmental. Mrs. Holloway from the hotel regularly brought over baked goods and stayed for tea, filling Abigail in on town history and gossip. Dr. Parker's wife, Sarah, a trained midwife, offered to assist with the birth when the time came, and Sheriff Dawson made a point of tipping his hat respectfully whenever he passed her on the street. As for Wade, he remained unfailingly kind and respectful, never once making Abigail feel like a burden. They developed an easy friendship, spending evenings on the cabin's porch discussing books or town happenings. Wade never tried to touch her or made any advances, treating her with a courtesy that slowly rebuilt her trust in men. One evening in late August, as they sat watching the sunset from the porch, Wade broached a subject they had both been avoiding. "Have you thought about what you'll do after the baby comes?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Abigail's hand moved to her belly. Now 8 months along. "I've been thinking about it constantly," she admitted. "I have no family to return to in the East. My parents disowned me when I married Thomas against their wishes." Wade nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I thought perhaps I might stay here," Abigail said hesitantly. "If I could find work as a teacher once the baby is old enough. Redemption Springs seems to be growing, and children need education." "The town has been discussing building a proper school," Wade said. "Currently, Pastor Wilson's wife teaches the children in the church 3 days a week, but she's expecting their 5th child and has mentioned wanting to step back." Hope flared in Abigail's heart. "Do you think the town council would consider me for the position? With your qualifications? They'd be fools not to," Wade said with a smile. "Though it might take time for some of them to come around." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Abigail," Wade said finally, using her given name with a gentleness that made her heart beat faster. "I want you to know that regardless of what you decide, the cabin is yours for as long as you need it, and so is my friendship." Abigail turned to look at him, touched by his words. In the fading light, with his strong profile outlined against the purple sky, Wade Ingram was a handsome man. More importantly, he was a good man, kind, honorable, and steadfast in a world that had shown her little of those qualities lately. "Thank you, Wade," she said softly. "Your friendship has meant more to me than I can express." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Abigail felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the baby. Confused by these new feelings, she quickly excused herself and went inside, leaving Wade alone on the porch, his expression thoughtful as he gazed up at the emerging stars. 3 weeks later, Abigail woke in the middle of the night to a sharp pain low in her abdomen. She sat up, gasping, as another contraction followed quickly on the heels of the first. The baby wasn't due for another 2 weeks, but it seemed her child had other plans. Abigail lit a lamp with shaking hands and struggled to her feet. Another contraction hit, stronger this time, causing her to grip the bedpost for support. When it passed, she threw a shawl around her shoulders and made her way to the door. Wade's quarters were above the store, just a short distance away, but it might as well have been miles given her condition. She had just reached the porch when another contraction forced her to her knees. The pain was intense, taking her breath away. As it subsided, she heard footsteps approaching rapidly. "Abigail?" Wade's voice called through the darkness. "Are you all right? I saw the light in your window." "The baby," Abigail gasped as he came into view. "It's coming." Wade was at her side in an instant, helping her to her feet. "Let's get you back inside. I'll fetch Dr. Parker and his wife." Once Abigail was settled back in bed, Wade rushed off into the night. He returned quickly with Sarah Parker, who immediately took charge of the situation. "Wade, fetch water and towels," she instructed. "Then wait outside. This isn't a place for men." Wade hesitated, looking at Abigail with concern. "Will she be all right?" Sarah's expression softened. "She's young and healthy. The baby's a bit early, but not dangerously so. Now go on. We women have been doing this since the beginning of time." The next hours were a blur of pain and effort for Abigail. Sarah proved to be a competent midwife, her calm voice guiding Abigail through each contraction. Outside the bedroom door, Abigail could occasionally hear Wade pacing, his boots wearing a path in the wooden floor. As dawn broke, with a final tremendous effort, Abigail brought her daughter into the world. The baby's first cry filled the cabin, strong and indignant. "A girl," Sarah announced, quickly cleaning and wrapping the infant. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Exhausted but exhilarated, Abigail reached for her daughter. The baby was tiny but perfect, with a dusting of dark hair and her father's cleft chin. Looking at her, Abigail felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. "May I come in?" Wade called from outside the door. Sarah looked to Abigail, who nodded. "Yes, come in." Wade entered cautiously, his eyes widening at the sight of Abigail holding the newborn. He approached slowly, as if afraid they might disappear if he moved too quickly. "She's beautiful," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "Just like her mother." Abigail blushed at the compliment. "Would you like to hold her?" Wade looked startled by the offer. "I don't know how, I might drop her." "Nonsense," Sarah said briskly. "Sit down in that chair, and I'll show you how to support her head." With extreme care, Wade took the tiny bundle in his arms. The baby looked impossibly small against his broad chest, her perfect face peaceful in sleep. "Have you thought of a name?" he asked, gently rocking the infant. Abigail had been considering names for months, but in this moment, only one seemed right. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." Wade smiled, looking down at the sleeping child. "It suits her." After Sarah left, promising to return later to check on mother and baby, Wade reluctantly handed Hope back to Abigail. "I should let you rest," he said, moving toward the door. "Is there anything you need before I go?" Abigail shook her head. "You've already done so much." "Thank you, Wade, for everything." As he reached the door, Abigail called after him. "Wade, would you be her godfather?" "I know it's a lot to ask, but she has no family except me, and you've been so kind to us both." Wade turned back, his expression a mixture of surprise and deep emotion. "I'd be honored," he said simply. In the days that followed, news of Hope's birth spread through town. To Abigail's surprise, many of the women who had previously avoided her now came bearing gifts for the baby hand-knit blankets, tiny clothes, preserved fruits, and advice, both solicited and unsolicited, on caring for a newborn. Wade was a constant presence, checking on them several times a day, bringing supplies, and often simply sitting with Abigail as she nursed Hope, sharing comfortable conversation or companionable silence. 2 weeks after Hope's birth, as autumn painted the surrounding mountains with gold and crimson, Pastor Wilson and his wife visited the cabin. They brought a basket of food and, to Abigail's surprise, a proposal. "The town council met yesterday," Pastor Wilson explained. "We've decided to build a proper schoolhouse, to be completed by next spring. In the meantime, we'd like you to take over teaching duties from my wife, starting after Christmas. The children can continue using the church until the school is ready." Abigail was stunned. I don't know what to say. This is wonderful news, but I have the baby to consider." Mrs. Wilson smiled. "Many of the mothers have offered to take turns watching Hope during school hours. They were quite impressed by your bookkeeping work for Wade. Word gets around in a small town." After the Wilsons left, Abigail sat on the porch with Hope sleeping in her arms, overwhelmed by the turn of events. Wade found her there when he came to visit after closing the store. "I hear congratulations are in order, Professor Keller," he said with a smile, taking his usual seat beside her. "News travels fast," Abigail replied, shaking her head in wonder. "I still can't believe it. A real teaching position, and so soon." "You deserve it," Wade said, "and it will give you and Hope security." They sat quietly for a while, watching as the sun set behind the mountains. Hope stirred in Abigail's arms, making tiny mewling sounds as she woke. "May I?" Wade asked, holding out his arms. Abigail handed the baby over, watching as Wade cradled her with growing confidence. In the 2 weeks since her birth, he had become increasingly comfortable holding Hope, often insisting on taking her so Abigail could rest. "She has your eyes," Wade observed, gazing down at the infant. "They're changing from blue to green." "My mother's eyes," Abigail said softly. "I always hoped my child would inherit them." Hope settled contentedly in Wade's arms, her tiny hand wrapping around his finger with surprising strength. The sight of them together, this strong, kind man and her daughter, stirred something deep in Abigail's heart. "Wade," she began hesitantly, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you." He looked up, his expression open. "What is it?" Abigail took a deep breath. "The cabin. You said I could stay as long as I needed, but now that I'll have a teaching position, I should start paying rent. It's only right." Wade frowned slightly. "That's not necessary, Abigail. The cabin was sitting empty before you came. Having you here costs me nothing." "It's not about the money," Abigail insisted. "It's about my independence, my self-respect. I can't continue accepting charity, especially now that I'll have my own income." Wade was quiet for a long moment, gently rocking Hope as he considered Abigail's words. "All right," he said finally. "If it matters that much to you, we can arrange a fair rent." Relief washed over Abigail. "Thank you for understanding." Wade hesitated, then added, "But there's something I'd like you to consider as well." "What's that?" "Marry me." The words hung in the evening air between them. Abigail stared at Wade, certain she had misheard. "What did you say?" she whispered. "Marry me," Wade repeated, his voice steadier now. "I know it's sudden, and perhaps I should have approached this more carefully, but seeing you with Hope these past weeks, Abigail, I've grown to care for you both deeply." Abigail's heart raced. "Wade, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to answer now," Wade said quickly. "Take time to think about it. I know you're still healing from Thomas's death, and I would never rush you. But I want you to know that my feelings are sincere. I admire your strength, your intelligence, your kindness, and hope." He looked down at the baby in his arms. "I already love her, as if she were my own." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes. "Wade, you're a good man, the best man I've ever known. But marriage is a serious step. I need to be sure." Wade nodded. "Of course. I'll wait for your answer, however long it takes." As autumn deepened into winter, Abigail settled into her role as Redemption Spring's new teacher. The children responded well to her, and the parents, even those who had initially been skeptical, came to appreciate her dedication and skill. Hope thrived under the collective care of the town's women, who took turns watching her during school hours. By Christmas, she was a chubby, happy baby, charming everyone with her sunny disposition and ready smile. Through it all, Wade remained a steadfast presence in their lives, never pressing Abigail for an answer to his proposal, but making his feelings clear through 1,000 small kindnesses. He built a cradle for Hope, carved from pine with delicate wildflowers etched into the headboard. He expanded the vegetable garden behind the cabin, adding a small greenhouse so Abigail could grow fresh greens even in winter. On cold evenings, He would often bring dinner from the hotel, staying to eat with them and read to Hope before reluctantly returning to his quarters above the store. As Christmas approached, Abigail found herself thinking more and more about Wade's proposal. She had grown to care deeply for him, but doubt still lingered. Was it too soon after Thomas? Was she being unfair to Wade, allowing him to take on the responsibility of another man's child? On Christmas Eve, the entire town gathered in the church for a special service. Abigail sat in a pew near the back, Hope sleeping peacefully in her arms, wrapped in a new blanket Wade had given her that morning. The church was decorated with pine boughs and candles, filling the air with a festive scent. Wade slipped in beside them just as the service was beginning. "Sorry I'm late," he whispered. "Had a last-minute customer." As Pastor Wilson began the service, Abigail found herself watching Wade more than listening to the sermon. In the candlelight, his profile was strong and reassuring. When the congregation sang Christmas carols, his deep voice blended with the others, resonant and true. And when Hope stirred and began to fuss, he instinctively reached for her, settling her against his shoulder with practiced ease. It was in that moment, watching Wade gently soothe her daughter, that Abigail knew her answer. The love she felt for him had grown gradually but unmistakably, building day by day through shared meals and conversations, through his kindness to her child, through the respect he had shown her from the first day. After the service, as they walked back to the cabin through softly falling snow, Abigail steeled her courage. "Wade," she began, "I've been thinking about your proposal." Wade's steps slowed. "And?" "Yes," Abigail said simply. "My answer is yes." Wade stopped walking entirely, turning to face her. "Are you certain? I don't want you to feel pressured or obligated." "I'm certain," Abigail assured him. "I love you, Wade Ingram. I love the man who offered shelter to a desperate stranger, who treated me with dignity when I had nothing to give but labor, who has loved my daughter as his own from the moment she was born." Wade's face lit with joy. Mindful of Hope, sleeping against Abigail's shoulder, he leaned forward and gently kissed Abigail's forehead, then her lips, a brief, tender touch that promised more. "I love you, Abigail Keller," he whispered against her hair. "You and Hope are the greatest gifts I could ever receive." They were married on New Year's Day, 1879, in a simple ceremony at the church. Most of the town attended, including many who had once whispered about them. Mrs. Holloway cried throughout the service and hosted a reception at the hotel afterward. Sheriff Dawson stood as Wade's best man, while Sarah Parker held Hope and served as Abigail's matron of honor. As husband and wife, Wade and Abigail moved into the cabin together, though Wade maintained his quarters above the store for late nights, when inventory or bookkeeping kept him working past dark. The arrangement raised a few eyebrows, but as the winter months passed, even the most conservative members of the community came to accept their unconventional family. By spring, when the new schoolhouse was completed, Abigail had settled comfortably into her dual roles as teacher and wife. Hope, now crawling and babbling her first words, was adored by her students, who competed for the chance to entertain her during breaks. One evening in late April, as they sat on the cabin's porch watching the sunset, Hope asleep inside after an active day, Wade took Abigail's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Saying yes to me?" Abigail turned to him in surprise. "Never. Why would you ask such a thing?" Wade shrugged. "Sometimes I wonder if I was selfish, asking you to marry me so soon after you arrived here. If I took advantage of your vulnerable position." "Wade Ingram," Abigail said firmly, "you have never taken advantage of me. From the moment we met, you have treated me with nothing but respect and kindness. You gave me dignity when I had none, a home when I was homeless, love when I thought I would never feel it again." She leaned forward and kissed him softly. "I married you because I love you, not because I needed security or protection. Wade's arms encircled her, drawing her close. I thank God every day for bringing you to my store that afternoon. As do I, Abigail whispered against his chest. As do I. They sat together as darkness fell, the first stars appearing overhead, two people who had found in each other not just love, but the promise of a future brighter than either had dared to hope for. In the years that followed, Redemption Springs continued to grow, as did the Ingram family. The year after their marriage, Abigail gave birth to a son, whom they named William, after Wade's father. 2 years later, a daughter joined their family, completing their circle of love. Hope grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's intelligence and her adoptive father's kindness. Though she knew the truth of her birth, she never questioned Wade's love for her. In his heart, and in the eyes of the community, she was his daughter in every way that mattered. The small cabin behind the store was eventually replaced by a proper house on the edge of town, with room for their growing family and the many guests who frequently gathered around their table. Yet they kept the cabin, maintaining it as a reminder of where their journey together had begun when a pregnant stranger tried to pay with her labor, and a cowboy paid her with dignity instead. And in that dignity, they had both found something far more precious, a love that would last a lifetime.